If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK. You guys are listening to a logical analysis of Joe Rogan and Michael Shermer talking flat earthers. Once again, for those that don't know, I am Bruce McGuire. I am the host, and I am not an advocate of flat earth theory. I do not advocate, believe, deny, or take sides in anything really. I just push forward and advocate for logic, for truth. Now, obviously, there's a lot of people out there that they're just obsessed with jumping to assumptions and conclusions and destinations. They don't actually care about real science or real logic, which by definition would mean they don't care about the actual truth. They prop up their faith-based presupposed conclusions and belief systems and label those science and just shut the door on everything and pretend that logic has no place. The cognitive dissonant coincidence theorists are known for certain logical fallacies. This is their playbook. Joe Rogan, again, one of these guys who doesn't realize how silly he is, but he is unique in the fact that he admits that he's an idiot and he doesn't know anything, and yet proceeds to give all these opinions while chastising all these other people. So he's very funny for reasons that I guess he doesn't realize. His unintentional comedy is off the charts. And yeah, so I get a lot of these requests for these logical analyses. Again, real science is logical, neutral, objective. It's not faith-based. It's not religious-based. It doesn't depend on taking on blind faith as gospel truth, propaganda peddled by those in perceived positions of authority. Appeal to authority is one of Joe Rogan's go-tos. He clearly doesn't understand the basics of logic, logical fallacies, or even the definition of science versus scientism. And this is something that a lot of people get stuck on. So Michael Shermer, we'll see how much of a goofball this guy is. But according to his website, michaelshermer.com, Michael Brant Shermer is an American science writer, historian of science, founder of the Skeptics Society, and editor-in-chief of its magazine Skeptic, which is largely devoted to investigating pseudoscientific and supernatural claims. The Skeptic Society currently has over 55,000 members. It's actually not a lot of members. But anyway, okay, so this guy, so real science, of course, science is skepticism. We'll see if he applies that and if his thoughts really are scientific or pseudoscientific or scientismic. Which, of course, it would be interesting to see how much of the indoctrination that Shermer received through his degrees he was skeptical of. Or did he just religiously take it on blind faith on whatever was in a book, that it was gospel, it was truth? Did he apply any of this investigation to claims of the establishment? Now, again, that does not mean Joe Rogan or Michael Shermer are actually wrong about any conclusions. I always have to reiterate, because there's so many cognitive dissonant coincidence theorists out there that have to pretend and strawman that I am somehow advocating for the opposite of their conclusion. No, they could be accidentally correct. Once again, the purpose of this logical analysis are to analyze the line of thinking, the reasoning. Because even a homeless crack addict on the street can be correct about things. That doesn't mean they got to that conclusion logically or scientifically. So that's the only purpose here. Once again, if you enjoy these or if you enjoy other episodes of the MindShock podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. If you like the podcast, hit the like button, share it across social media platforms, and you can check us out on Twitter, Reddit, Patreon, and Facebook. Any questions, thoughts, theories, rebuttals, debunkings, thoughts of any kind, leave them in the comment section. All right, so let's get started here.
Conspiracies,
Hillary
flat
Clinton,
earthers.
flat earthers. Forests aren't real. Is that what they're saying, Jamie? The flat earthers? We're going to talk about the flat earthers for one reason. The reason why I wanted to bring this up is because I think there's a lot of folks out there that are super gullible, and I think they're being trolled.
All right, so, okay, this is actually one of the earliest mentions in the mainstream of the new resurgence of flat earthers, which, again, if you're not familiar with the Bruce McGuire theory, I believe it's a possibility that the flat earth could be a psyop because of how poorly defended it is from the heliocentric globe. I'm not saying the heliocentric globe theory is false in any way, but obviously the arguments being used by those publicly debating flat earthers are so poor, it would seem that there's something else going on, or the flat earth theory is true. But I'm not going to assume the flat earth theory true for this logical analysis, although it's kind of irrelevant because we're just discussing the logic involved here. But some people believe that flat earth is a psyop. And again, this could include either flat earth being real or not real. But this discussion was taken from the Joe Rogan Experience podcast number 847. This was posted on September 20th, 2016, so quite a few years ago now. And other reasons people think the flat earth is a psyop is because of the way it's mentioned. So obviously it's used to kind of circle in the conspiracy theorists, aka critical thinkers. So obviously the CIA has propagandized that term to kind of ostracize and shut down people trying to actually question anything, because brainwashed, religious, faith-based coincidence theorist zombies are what the establishment wants. So regarding Joe's point on gullibility, I mean, that's an excellent point. Is Joe gullible? Did he just believe whatever the establishment told him and he took it on blind faith as gospel truth without actually applying any kind of logic, critical thinking, deductive reasoning, just like Michael Shermer? Let's find out here.
I think they're being trolled by people who put together these. It's one of two options. Either they're being trolled by people who put together these elaborate arguments for something that they don't believe because they're just trying to make money off of YouTube views, which is entirely possible.
Yep.
And this needs to be thought of. I mean, it really needs to be considered.
Okay, I got to interrupt him there because this kind of illogicality, we see it all the time. They're making money off of it. Who's making more money? People peddling the establishment narrative like Neil deGrasse Tyson, Bill Nye. Are these random YouTuber flat earthers really making more money than those pushing the narrative of the establishment? Because if you want to illogically use the metric of who's making more money, those supporting the establishment, I mean, we're talking trillions and trillions of dollars are circling in the academic, mainstream, status quo, industrial complex that kind of encompasses most of the modern world. So who's really making more money here? Some random flat earth YouTubers making flat earth videos? I mean, that's a drop in the bucket. It's almost nothing. And the flat earthers are probably the most ostracized even within the conspiracy field. So if money was the only goal, wouldn't those people that are kind of pushing flat earth, they would push something else? I mean, look at Alex Jones. Alex Jones is not a flat earther. And he's pushing conspiracies. He's making a lot of money. Why would he, if flat earth was such a lucrative field, why isn't he pushing flat earth? So this kind of silly nonsense is perfectly indicative of Joe Rogan's thought process, or lack thereof, his inability to understand the fundamental basics of logical thinking, critical thinking, deductive reasoning. And another point, he's already admittingly creating these false dichotomies. There's two options. They're being trolled by these elaborate videos. So again, or arguments, is this merely projection? Because again, if you're watching some kind of elaborate Discovery Channel or NASA video showing all of this CGI imagery, which again, just because it's CGI, that doesn't mean that's not what the universe looks like. The Earth might be a heliocentric globe. The planets might all look like that. So again, that's a false dichotomy on the side of the flat earthers that believe that. But regardless, let's say that it's all true. Just I hope the flat earthers don't get mad at me here. But let's just assume it's all true. Making these, he's projecting this argument that just because if NASA's making these fancy videos and NASA, the Discovery Channel is making money. All these institutionalized systems and media proponents are making money off heliocentric theory. Does that mean they're lying? So him applying this to this is the silliest of the silly. Like, why not actually examine scientific arguments? Why is everybody so scared of that?
Because YouTube videos can be extremely lucrative. If you can get a YouTube video with millions of hits, and a lot of these videos on all sorts of different conspiracies and all sorts of different crazy things can generate that kind of volume.
Mm-hmm. And also pointing out here, I believe he's referring to Eric Dubé at the time, and even now he's one of the biggest. At the time, his channel was not even monetized. So all of those millions of views and all that, again, these coincidence theorists, they really hate logic and facts because he's making all these arguments that are just completely untrue and fallacious. Even if they were true, it wouldn't make sense, but they're not even true. So, yes, obviously there are some YouTubers who are making some kind of money, but they're not making Discovery Channel money. They're not making Neil deGrasse Tyson money. So again, using this metric of money, not that it's a bad metric. Follow the money is a good rule of thumb. For example, again, these guys cannot do logic. But if, again, obviously I don't believe the flat earth theory is true, but if it's true, just doing basic brain exercises here. To disrupt that status quo, to disrupt the establishment, that would cost too much money. It's easier to just go along with the lie. So if the conspiracy is true, again, I'm not saying it's true, but if it's true, you could see how it would logically function. Obviously, these guys can't, but too indoctrinated, too cognitive dissonant, too silly and illogical. But that's, again, the point of these logical analyses. And I pick a lot of these flat earth videos because they're really, really excellent for developing logic. It doesn't matter which side you're on. That's irrelevant. Just if anybody interested in science and logic and psychology, you could see all of these play out to the extreme regarding flat earth, because for whatever reason, it's a very triggering topic for many people. Obviously, the real reason is it exposes their faith-based belief systems as faith-based, illogical, not scientific. Even if true, again, that doesn't mean it's untrue. But people get triggered not necessarily because things are true or untrue, but it exposes certain things they don't like exposed. The ego can't handle it. And then, of course, we have the Dunning-Kruger variable, where people are too incompetent to realize their own incompetence, which, of course, is a factor here as well. But let's continue.
You're making real money.
Pennies on the dollar, but if it's millions,
yes.
You can,
it starts becoming real money, and if you do a bunch of them and you do them on a regular basis, it becomes a gig. It becomes like what they do. They
right.
create these silly videos.
Wait, silly? So he watched them? Like, for example, you could say Eric Dubé's videos are completely false, but they do have good graphics. Some people call NASA's videos silly, and some of them are so. Some people call the moon landings silly videos. Does that mean they didn't go, though? They could have faked the moon landings, made all those silly videos. Does that mean they didn't go?
But people who just don't have the time or the inclination to actually read scientific papers and articles and journals and all these different things that explain how we've known for a long time that the Earth is round.
Right.
And has he done that? So again, this is just more a projection from Joe Rogan, because the arguments that he chooses, so again, of course, there are legitimate arguments for the heliocentric globe. He doesn't know any of them, because he's accurately projected here that he hasn't had the time, the inclination to read the real science. Because again, you'd also, obviously, the Dunning-Kruger, if it's too extreme and he's not competent enough or doesn't have the inclination or time to really understand the difference between science and scientism, he wouldn't be able to understand, and he has to rely to these entertainment tricks we've known for a long time, these inflections of words, because he knows he doesn't have real points. So he has to make these appeals to people through these kind of entertainment level acting devices, basically, which is why some people actually think that Joe Rogan himself is a shill. If you haven't checked out the MindShock Conspiracy Shills podcast, we go over whether people like Joe Rogan, Alex Jones, David Icke are shills or not. Obviously, it's difficult to tell. He could just be a silly illogical goofball. We don't know.
Yeah, it's a myth that Columbus proved that the Earth is not flat, that it's round. The ancients knew, the Greeks knew, Columbus knew, everyone knew.
The ancients knew, really? So is Michael Shermer that clueless about history? Because all these presuppositions are bizarre. So yes, according to certain literature, which of course you'd have to verify if you're not being religious, if you're being scientific instead of pseudoscientific or scientismic, you would verify the sources. You would find the earliest mentions of Pythagoras and Aristotle and these guys that supposedly theorized the heliocentric globe and what arguments they had. Clearly, all of these other ancient civilizations did have a flat model. Obviously, it doesn't mean they were right. The Earth's a heliocentric globe. It's a heliocentric globe. But again, choosing these easily debunked and also faith-based arguments like Shermer's doing here, it's really weird. It doesn't promote a lot of confidence in Shermer's logical ability. I don't really know who this guy is. I haven't read his material, but just right off the bat, he's this clueless about ancient civilizations. Now, again, it might not be true, but there is documentation that a lot of these ancients believed the Earth was flat or some kind of enclosed snow globe type system. Obviously, it doesn't mean that's the correct system. I think the Mayans believed the Earth was on the back of a turtle or something. That's not a globe. That's a dome-shaped Earth that they believed in. So Shermer's that clueless that he doesn't even know what the ancient... Like, again, these are mainstream narratives. We're not even going into conspiracy. This is what's in the textbooks that he's supposed to have read. He wasn't paying attention in school, or he's just that clueless? I don't know.
Knew then that it was round.
The Sumerians knew.
Absolutely.
They're just...
The Sumerians? Oh, man. And then Shermer agrees immediately. Absolutely. So these guys are so clueless that they don't even know the basics of establishment Sumerian cosmology. Just jump on Wikipedia, guys. I mean, come on, children. This is children's level stuff. And these goofballs are this clueless? I was not expecting this. I mean, I guess I give people way too much credit. I expect a guy who's supposed to be this scientific guy. I mean, Shermer is supposedly a historian of science. And he's this clueless, he doesn't even know children's level Sumerian cosmology? Oh man, this is hilarious for all the wrong reasons. But okay, anybody can jump on Wikipedia. Again, we're not going into any conspiracy here. We're going to official mainstream narratives. Right from Wikipedia, Sumerian cosmology. The Sumerians envisioned the universe as a closed dome surrounded by primordial saltwater sea. So this is the classic dome cosmology. Underneath the terrestrial Earth, which formed the base of the dome. So this terrestrial Earth is a flat plane forming the base of the dome, underneath which existed an underworld and a freshwater ocean called Abzu. The deity of the dome-shaped firmament was named An. That of the earth was named Kai. First, the underground world was believed to be an extension of the goddess Kai, but was later developed into the concept of Kur. The primordial saltwater sea was named Namu, who became known as Tiamat during and after the Sumerian Renaissance. All right, so clearly we have a cosmology of an enclosed dome with a firmament. So Joe Rogan and Michael Shermer are this clueless that they can't even do a 60-second Wikipedia search? I mean, it's just really bizarre how these goofballs are lower than a children's level understanding of even the mainstream narrative. This is, again, we're not assuming the heliocentric globe is false for this. It's very clear, according to the mainstream. Again, this could also be wrong. Maybe the Sumerians really did believe in a heliocentric globe, but where is that information? If there's no proof, there's no proof. All of the mainstream information propaganda, not call it what you will. These guys are not even familiar with the narrative, with the official narrative. They're that clueless. It's hard to believe. Again, this is why some people think it's a psyop. I'm not sure though. Maybe these guys really are that clueless and they don't even have the basics of ancient historical cosmologies down, or the basics of logic or science, and even know these basic definitions. I don't know which is the case, but let's continue with these goofballs here.
Depictions on clay.
Right.
When they drew it in clay, they drew all the planets as circles.
Right.
They knew.
Well, that's also false, actually. The celestial bodies that they drew, depending on which civilization, some of them were drawn as stars, not circles. And some of them were drawn as various shapes. And again, I really don't understand. This is why people think it's a psyop. Can these guys really be this goofy and clueless to not understand 2-dimension versus 3-dimension, to not understand how light and gases work? So these heavenly bodies, the wandering stars, as they were called, translated originally, who said they were physical? If these are energies, if these are bodies of energy, again, understanding what the ancients thought and what real reality is, those are two different things, obviously. But pretending to be either this intellectually dishonest or this clueless, I mean, these are new lows. These guys, I mean, I don't know if they realize that they're embarrassing themselves this badly. Again, if they accidentally believe in the correct heliocentric globe model universe, if that's the correct model, again, if it's flat, it's flat. If it's a heliocentric globe, it's a heliocentric globe. And that's irrelevant to the point of logical examination, because so far, these goofballs, they're exposing to the world that they don't even have the basic understanding of the mainstream historical cosmology of the ancients.
They knew.
Right. I mean, there's some obvious simple ones anybody could do. If you see an eclipse, like a lunar eclipse, you can see the Earth's shadow on the moon. It's round.
Okay. Oh, man. I didn't specifically address this one before in other podcasts, so I guess I'll do it now. I'm sure people are interested in the logical analysis of that. So, in real science, there are things called controls to account for variables. Again, this is basic children's level information, but for whatever reason, these goofballs don't seem to understand. So you have a shadow, supposedly of the Earth. So, of course, there could be a lot of different explanations, but real quick, obviously these goofballs don't understand what a selenilion eclipse is. So in a selenilion, or a selenhelion, occurs when both the sun and an eclipse moon can be observed at the same time. Both bodies appear above the horizon at opposite points in the sky. This arrangement has led to the phenomenon, why is it called a phenomenon, being called a horizontal eclipse. Now, if it's the Earth that's in between, then how can you see them above the horizon linearly? So again, these goofballs have never heard of this eclipse. Now, again, point against the flat earthers. This does not mean that the Earth is flat. That just means there's other variables. So obviously, heliocentric globe believers, they will explain it using refraction or all these other variables. That would have to be proven definitively. But, I mean, even if you look at space.com regarding the selenihelion, you can look up this eclipse, even on space.com. Again, this is just all mainstream information, nothing conspiratorial. This is a phenomenon that celestial geometry says cannot happen. And indeed, during a lunar eclipse, the sun and the moon are exactly 180 degrees apart in the sky in a perfect alignment. Such an observation would seem impossible. Okay, so you won't hear these guys talking about it. But because they're just basing all of their faith-based presuppositions that it's definitely the Earth's shadow. This circular reasoning, logical fallacy. And of course, all these cognitive biases, and where they're just looking, confirmation bias, they're just looking for any information that matches their belief, the belief system they were indoctrinated to, because cognitive dissonance is too uncomfortable to examine alternate explanations. Real science is objective and neutral. It's not about justifying indoctrination or faith-based propaganda belief systems. Now, it is well known that on the light spectrum, there are light's wavelengths longer than those of visible lights. This is what the human eye cannot see. So these would be seemingly opaque celestial bodies. For example, if you look into these ancient cosmologies, clearly these guys have not done that. They're completely clueless. But the black sun, Rahu, there's a lot of different explanations for other heavenly bodies that could be in the sky. Now, again, this does not prove flat Earth in any way. These bodies already exist. I mean, this is, again, mainstream information. You don't have to go into the conspiracy field. So there would be either stars, planets that could consist of wavelengths longer than what the human eye can see, but when they would pass in front of another body, like the moon, you wouldn't be able to see them. So it would appear like an eclipse. Again, in real science, you have controls and you account for variables. You don't fall into false dichotomies or just cling desperately to faith-based belief systems where it has to be the Earth's shadow or the Earth between the sun and the moon. It has to be. It can't be anything else. That's just impossible. That's blasphemous. You're not allowed to look at any alternative explanations. You have to be a brainwashed, brain-dead zombie. Now, again, as with most arguments, this has nothing to do with flat Earth or globe Earth. This could be true in either model, which is what, again, these goofballs that discuss this topic publicly, they just have the fundamental lack of understanding of basic logic and reason and the differences between science and scientism. They're just that clueless. It's like they've never heard of the scientific method. They just don't understand empiricism or any of these other things. But there are many explanations for that, and just about all of them could happen either on a flat plane or on a heliocentric globe. So again, these guys being clueless of something does not mean that scientifically justifies their faith-based presupposed belief system.
You know, if you're high enough and, you know, the ships are sailing out, you can see the mast is the last thing you would see.
Okay, so that's the common one. So the most easily debunked is, of course, the ships going over the horizon. Again, these guys completely clueless to how the human eye works. And, you know, train tracks touch in the distance. That must mean they really touch because they look like they touch. I mean, this is the level of illogicality these goofballs bring to the table. So it's no wonder that some believe that flat Earth could be a psyop when these ridiculous arguments are brought forth publicly. That's going to cause a rise in flat earthers. So is that because flat Earth is a psyop and they want to cause an increase in flat earthers to just add to the madness of society and get people to discredit all conspiracies? I mean, that's one of the theories. I don't know which true or not. This is MINDSHOCK. The only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure.
As the hull drops over the horizon first slowly. You know, there's things like that we know the Earth is round.
Even though they wouldn't prove round or flat. Man, these guys are silly.
Round. You know, you travel around, you come back to where you started.
Because you can't do that on a dinner plate? Like, if they just spent 1 minute looking at the flat Earth arguments, they're not going to pick the most easily debunked ones on purpose unless they're trying to embarrass themselves publicly. If they're trying to show the world on this podcast that they don't understand even basic logic, then well done, Joe Rogan and Michael Shermer.
You know, now their explanation, the flat earthers, is that, yeah, it's round like a pizza, but a round flat pizza, and all the continents are on the one flat face side up. And that the satellites are up there going around. It's like, yeah, but the satellite photos don't show all the continents in one picture because some of them are on the other side of the globe, so that refutes that.
Wait, does it? Okay, I'm actually a little bit impressed because the guy obviously did look at that short explanation of whatever, round like a pizza. So obviously, again, he's all these fallacies. Black and white fallacies, straw man fallacies, part to a whole compositional logical fallacies. There's flat earthers that don't believe in satellites at all. So, like, which group of flat earthers is he talking about? He's pretending they're all one group just to make it an easier target to discredit. I mean, that's just silly, illogical, non-scientific nonsense. So, okay, regarding the continent size, he's saying the continents are not shown. How far back would the satellite have to be, number one? Number two, are you taking as gospel truth on blind faith that the images are not manipulated in any way? Because obviously he's done maybe 10 seconds of research on flat Earth to know that that one of the models, some of them is an infinite plane. It's not like a pizza pie. But anyway, he knows he spent however many seconds, but he didn't look at the fact that one of the main tenets, one of the main pillars of the flat Earth conspiracy theory is that all of this CGI imagery is falsified. Now, even when you look at the satellite images, the continents do appear to be drastically larger sizes. So obviously he hasn't done any real research. Now that's problematic. Now again, obviously that obviously doesn't prove flat Earth in any way, but it does refute that the images are non-doctored and 100% authentic and legitimate. So again, this goofball just has not done any research.
Well, not only that, but they think that satellites are actually in planes. They're in planes in low Earth orbit that are just circling around. There's no actual satellites. They don't even believe in satellites.
Yeah, so...
Again, some of them do, some of them don't. Joe Rogan falling for the same fallacies here. Compositional logical fallacies, black and white fallacies, straw man fallacies. Yeah, it's rough.
Back to your original comment, some of these recent ones are so crazy that you can't help but think, okay, they don't believe it. They're just yanking our chain.
Appeal to incredulity logical fallacy. So he's finding it crazy, therefore that must mean it's not true. The truth is stranger than fiction, goofballs. It's just so funny how they don't have a shred of logic. Again, doesn't mean that whatever they put their faith into is wrong. I mean, out of all the things that illogical humans put their faith into, obviously a certain amount are going to be true. The majority might be true. I mean, maybe. But for the purpose of logic, clearly there's a fundamental lack of basics on both of their parts, which is quite amusing or painful, depending on how you look at it.
Yanking our chain for maybe financial reasons. But that does get to the question I always get, which is, do these people really believe it? The cult leaders, the people that make extraordinary claims, are they just making this stuff up? People make shit up all the time.
Wait, is he describing heliocentric globe believers here? Is he describing the establishment, the cult leaders? Because if he's hopelessly indoctrinated into the cult of state and authority worship, I mean, that's one of Joe Rogan's go-to fallacies, appeal to authority. We're saying, well, you're not a scientist, you need a... So, that's his go-to, because he, again, doesn't understand even the basics of logic or how logical fallacies work, or the differences between science and scientism. So, regarding that aspect of it, did Shermer accurately project here, psychological projection, where his subconscious recognized what he was doing and projected it on an opposing view, like the flat earthers? Again, regardless of the conclusion, not talking about that, but the processes. So the cult of authority worship that has indoctrinated the masses, like these illogical goofballs, the sheep, the cognitive dissonant sheep who can't think logically, critically, can't utilize deductive reasoning. So if this cult that he's projecting, how does he know he's not the one indoctrinated into the cult? Obviously his subconscious knows, but the subconscious is not connected to the conscious directly. Again, if they studied the basics of human psychology, they would know how their own brain works, so they'd be less susceptible to brainwashing, biases, and all these things that they're clearly exhibiting here. Even again, if their ultimate conclusion is correct, it's not for the reasons they think it is, and they're completely logical in their process.
It's called fiction fantasy. Or do they really believe it? Are they, true believers? And
when you're making all these extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So the burden of proof is on the one making the claim. So obviously if the flat earthers are claiming flat earth, yes, that's their burden of proof. If the heliocentric globe earthers are claiming a heliocentric globe, the earth spinning on its own axis faster than the speed of sound, that's an extraordinary claim. So you're going to need extraordinary evidence that's non-fallacious if you want a scientifically minded individual to believe it. So are these guys so clueless that all they can do is psychologically project these things because only their subconscious can see it, completely disconnected from their main conscious mind, which is just bereft of logic and reason?
It's hard to tell. It's hard to get inside people's heads. The old flat earthers in the 19th century, I think they really did believe it. There wasn't much money to be made, on those kinds of things. I mentioned the Alfred Russel Wallace, who was the co-discoverer of natural selection with Darwin. I wrote my dissertation on him and wrote a biography of him, and he was quite the colorful character who was so open-minded to new ideas that he was also gullible. So open-minded enough to see this radical new theory of the evolution of life by natural selection. That's good. Pioneered other fields like biogeography and so on. But he also was really into spiritualism and phrenology, seances,
Channeling,
all that stuff. And but then he encountered an ad in one of the natural history magazines for this 500-pound bet if anybody could prove the Earth is round. So he devised a test, and he went down to the Bedford Canal.
All right, hold on. So right before we get into the Bedford water experiment, which is an interesting one. I haven't covered that one yet, so we'll get into it in a second. But he's saying he was so open-minded this or that. It's very interesting how his circular reasoning, logical fallacies, natural selection, all these things, again, I've discussed this in the past, theory of evolution, natural selection and the theory of evolution are two very, very different things. So natural selection are changes in traits or characteristics within the same species. Obviously, evolution itself is one species turning into another species, like a rock turning into a fish, or thing. I mean, that you can magically invoke millions or billions of years to make that sound more plausible. But again, it's not something that's observed directly. You have to put your faith in the millions or billions of years. Now, again, I'm not saying it's not true. The trolls and the cognitive dissonant coincidence theorists always jump on me for that, pretending that I'm advocating something else. I'm saying the truth is unknown. That's all I'm saying. So this goofball, he's saying it's good that he was open-minded to that, but how about just being objective? Whatever the evidence supports. Open-minded does go hand in hand with being scientific, but he's talking about gullible. So he's presupposing engaging in all these circular reasoning fallacies. Again, due to his own Dunning-Kruger, he doesn't have the competence to realize his own incompetence, and his ego prevents him from considering the possibility that he's wrong. So with some of these spiritualistic practices, channeling all that, if that is true and does work and people are doing it, this goofball will never know because he really isn't a skeptic. He's just a dogma peddler for the establishment. And he doesn't have the competency to realize it, unless he does and he's in on it, this is all an act. But it doesn't seem to be. Just examining his mannerism, he really does seem to be this clueless and believe that the establishment dogma is gospel truth that can't be wrong. And that spirituality or anything that doesn't match this gospel, even though the more that mainstream scientism, especially in the terms of quantum theory, it's catching up a lot to spiritualism, which is interesting. It's proving it true. So in another 500 years, a lot of these, maybe not even, maybe 50 years, a lot of these ancient spiritual practices, as they are understood, like today's magic is tomorrow's science. Today's spiritualism or sorcery, that's tomorrow's science. Once there's a certain level of understanding, it's no longer magic or supernatural. So again, these goofballs fail to understand these basics. I mean, children can understand this, but these guys are so thoroughly indoctrinated into the cult of state worship, mainstream dogma. They can't consider these things, and because they haven't studied even basic psychology or logical fallacies, they don't understand how what they think is science is actually scientism. It's religious, faith-based thinking. It does not match up with the scientific method, which is, of course, objective. All right, so let's jump into the Bedford water experiment here.
So he devised a test, and he went down to the Bedford Canal, which is a long strait, like 10 kilometers long. You can see the whole distance. And if you put these little sticks in the ground with markers on them, and you get a little telescope like a surveyor's scope, and you line it up, you can see that it bends. So at each point, the stick is 3 meters above the ground at each point, and but you can see that it's dropped down in the last one, so it's bent. So he won the bet. But he didn't get paid, of course, because these people are cranks. And so he had to take him to court. This ended up costing him about 15 years of his career, just wasting time, writing letters and getting court dates and suing this guy and, whatever.
Just to try to win the bet?
Yeah, just try to win the bet. So, and of course, what happens, you get caught up emotionally, like, I'm not going to let this bastard get away with this. He should have just cut his losses and left. But anyway, and I found these letters that this guy wrote to the the Royal Geographical Society about Alfred Russel Wallace. You have one member of your society that should be, he's a quack and a crank, and and he wrote letters to Wallace's wife. You better not sleep in your bed at night quietly because I'm coming to get you guys. And it's like,
Whoa.
like death threats. Yeah. So it's always questionable to deal with cranks because some of them are a little mentally deranged.
Is that more projection there, Michael Shermer? How deranged do you have to be hopelessly indoctrinated into the cult of state authority worship and scientism to not be able to employ logic and reason? All right, so let's examine his claims about the Bedford experiment. All right, so this is, of course, a very contested experiment. Obviously, there's a lot of problems with it because it was not carried out the same way in every instance. So that's bizarre. Also, there's a lot of variables like refraction. So how would it work? How would it work on a flat plane versus a sphere? Could you get either result on either model? These are, of course, the questions that the scientific, logical individual would ask, because regardless of the results, would it really prove the surface of the Earth either way? So I'll go through the mainstream narrative. This is the Bedford level experiment from Wikipedia. It's a series of observations carried along a 6-mile, 9.7-kilometer length of the old Bedford River on the Bedford level of Cambridgeshire Fens in the UK during the 19th and early 20th centuries to measure the curvature of the Earth. Samuel Burley Robotham, who conducted the first observations starting in 1838, claimed he had proven the Earth to be flat. However, in 1870, after adjusting Robotham's method to avoid the effects of atmospheric refraction, Alfred Russel Wallace found a curvature consistent with a spherical Earth. Now, here's the other thing. Both sides of this so-called debate claim refraction in their favor, regardless of what the result. So if the result matches or doesn't matches, they use refraction as an excuse to match their faith-based belief system. It's quite bizarre and unscientific. But anyway, okay. So the Bedford level, at the point chosen for all the experiments, the river is a slow-flowing drainage canal running in an uninterrupted straight line for a 6-mile stretch to the northeast of the village of Welney. This makes it an ideal location to directly measure the curvature of the Earth, as Robotham wrote in Zetetic Astronomy. If the Earth is a globe and is 25,000 English statute miles in circumference, the surface of all standing water must have a certain degree of convexity. Every part must be an arc of a circle. From the summit of any such arc, there will exist a curvature or declination of 8 inches in the first statute mile. In the second mile, the fall will be 32 inches, in the third mile, 72, or 6 feet, as shown in the following diagram. After the first few miles, the curvature would be so great that no difficulty could exist in detecting either its actual existence or its proportion. In the county of Cambridge, there is an artificial river or canal called the Old Bedford. It is upwards of 20 miles in length and passes in a straight line through that part of the fens called the Bedford level. The water is nearly stationary, often completely so, and throughout its entire length has no interruption from locks or water gates of any kind, so that it is in every respect well adapted for ascertaining whether any or what amount of convexity really exists. Experiments. The first experiment at this site was conducted by Robotham in the summer of 1838. He waded into the river and used a telescope held 8 inches, 20 centimeters, above the water to watch a boat with a flag on its mast 3 feet above the water row slowly away from him. He reported that the vessel remained constantly in his view for the full 6 miles to Welney Bridge, whereas had the water surface been curved with the accepted circumference of a spherical Earth, the top of the mast would have been some 11 feet below his line of sight. He published this observation using the pseudonym Parallax in 1849 and subsequently expanded into a book, Earth Not a Globe, published in 1865. Rowbotham repeated his experiments several times over the years, but his claims received little attention until in 1870, a supporter by the name of John Hampden offered a wager that he could show, by repeating Rowbotham's experiment, that the Earth was flat. The noted naturalist and qualified surveyor Alfred Russel Wallace accepted the wager. Wallace, by virtue of his surveyor's training and knowledge of physics, avoided the errors of the preceding experiments and won the bet. Okay, so here's the thing. The wager was that he repeated Rowbotham's experiment. So the experiment, if the experiment is using a telescope or whatnot 8 inches above the water, if those were the agreed terms, then you have to repeat the same experiment. You can't adjust the variables. Now, again, that's separate from whether the Earth is a globe or flat. I'm just saying, if that was the wager. Do we have the exact agreed terms of the wager and whether or not someone cheated? And I'll go into that next. Obviously, Shermer's either completely clueless about this or he was intellectually dishonest in presenting this information because it didn't match what he wanted to get across. And intellectual dishonesty is, of course, a huge, huge problem. So, okay, the crucial steps to avoid the errors, according to this Wikipedia, some people would call this cheating if you change the factors, right? Like, if you change the variables, you're not replicating the experiment exactly, right? But anyway, this is what it said. The crucial steps were to, 1, set a sight line 13 feet above the water, and thereby reduce the effects of atmospheric refraction, and 2, add a pole in the middle that can be used to see the bump caused by the curvature of the Earth between the 2 endpoints. Despite Hampden initially refusing to accept the demonstration, Wallace was awarded the bet by the referee, editor of The Field sports magazine. So here's the other thing, though. Did Hampden, who decided on the referee? Was the referee an establishment fella? Or was he truly neutral and impartial? And how did they verify that, for example, the middle pole was not offset? Or whatever. I mean, to know that they weren't that someone didn't cheat. Anyway, continuing on here, Hampden subsequently published a pamphlet alleging that Wallace had cheated and sued for his money. Several protracted court cases ensued, with the result that Hampden was imprisoned for threatening to kill Wallace. Once again, is this whether someone threatened to kill someone or not, or even killed them or not, the science is neutral and people's emotions have nothing to do with the scientific veracity of this experiment, which is, of course, what we should be focusing on. So he threatened to kill Wallace and also sued him for libel, or he was imprisoned for threatening to kill Wallace and for libel. The same court ruled that the wager had been invalid because Hampden retracted the bet and required that Wallace return the money to Hampden. Wallace, who had been unaware of Rowbotham's earlier experiments, was criticized by his peers for his injudicious involvement in a bet to decide the most fundamental and established of scientific facts. So, of course, real science is always open to review and criticism. Religion, scientism, on the other hand, is not. It had very fixed beliefs, they cannot be wrong. They're viewed as religious dogma. So again, very important to keep the definitions of scientism and science in mind when discussing these subjects. So it is very bizarre here to determine who cheated, and he said he never got the money, but according to this wiki, he did get the money. So is Shermer clueless? Did Shermer not even do a 60-second search on the Wikipedia, or is the Wikipedia wrong? I mean, I'll get into the claims made by the Flat Earth side in a moment. So in 1901, Henry Yule Oldham, a reader in geography at King's College, Cambridge, reproduced Wallace's results using 3 fixed poles at equal height above water level. When viewing through a theodolite, the middle pole was found to be almost 3 feet higher than the poles at each end. This version of the experiment was taught in school until photographs of Earth from space became available. Advocates of flat Earth, however, were not deterred On May 11, 1904, Lady Elizabeth Ann Blount, who would go on to be influential in the formation of the Flat Earth Society, hired a commercial photographer to use a telephoto lens camera to take a picture from Welney of a large white sheet she had placed the bottom edge near the surface of the river at Rowbotham's original position 6 miles away. The photographer, Edgar Clifton, from Dalmeyer's studio, mounted his camera 2 feet above the water at Welney and was surprised to be able to obtain a picture of the target, which he believed should have been invisible to him given the low mounting point of the camera. Lady Blount published the results far and wide. These controversies became a regular feature in the English Mechanic magazine in 1904-1905, which published Blount's photo and reported 2 experiments in 1905 that showed the opposite results. One of these, by Clement Stratton on the Ashby Canal, showed a dip on a sight line only above the surface. Okay, refraction. Atmospheric refraction can produce the results noted by Rowbotham and Blount. Because the density of the air in Earth's atmosphere decreases with height above the Earth's surface, all light rays traveling nearly horizontally bend downward so that the line of sight is a curve. This phenomenon is routinely accounted for in leveling and celestial navigation. If the measurement is close enough to the surface, the downward curve may match the mean curvature of the Earth's surface. In this case, the 2 effects of assumed curvature and refraction could cancel each other out, and the Earth will then appear flat in optical experiments. This would have been aided on each occasion by a temperature inversion in the atmosphere, with temperature increasing with altitude above the canal, similar to the phenomenon of the superior image mirage. Temperature inversions like this are common. An increase in air temperature or lapse rate of 0.11 degrees Celsius per meter of altitude would create an illusion of a flat canal, and all optical measurements made near ground level would be consistent with a completely flat surface. If the lapse rate were higher than this, temperature increasing with height at a greater rate, all optical observations would be consistent with a concave surface, a bowl-shaped Earth. Under average conditions, optical measurements are consistent with a spherical Earth approximately 15% less curved than its true diameter. Repetition of the atmospheric conditions required for each of these many observations is not likely, and warm days over still water can produce favorable conditions. All right, so here's the real takeaway here. There are always other variables. So if the Earth is flat, atmospheric conditions, human perspective, could account for ships appearing to go over the horizon. Similarly, if the Earth is a globe, 25,000 miles in circumference, the true curvature amount might not be seen, and so the true horizon is actually higher than the horizon that you see, again, due to atmospheric distortion, temperature, atmospheric conditions, all of these things. So the true horizon is higher than the horizon that you see. Again, I keep bringing up convergence. Train tracks appear to touch. That doesn't mean they touch, and no, that has nothing to do with the shape of the Earth. That's the human eye and atmospheric conditions. So the real takeaway here is that things can appear to look a certain way even if that is not representative of physical reality. So does this experiment truly prove anything either way? That's the real question here. If you're being objective and logical and truly scientific and skeptical of both models, and if you're trying to single out variables and how they affect results. So it's no surprise that objects far on the horizon will bleed into the horizon, so to speak, again, depending on all of these other factors. Another interesting thing to research is the Fata Morgana mirage. So obviously this is named after the Arthurian sorceress Morgan Le Fay. So in this Fata Morgana, that's when ships appear to be floating over the horizon. And again, this is due to all of these other variables. Obviously, the ships are not really floating. So can you really trust your eyes when it comes to looking across great distances where there's countless other variables? And how many variables have not yet been discovered that affect human vision? Or are we going to pretend that humans know 100% of everything there is to know at this moment? That's quite silly. So let's look into the Flat Earth side. So this is from the Flat Earth Society, and yes, I am aware that the Flat Earthers say that this is the controlled opposition website to make Flat Earth look silly. I'm just presenting it for the sake of presenting this particular side. Then I'll go into more information theoretically more objective. Okay, the Bedford level experiment was a series of observations carried out along a 6-mile length of the old Bedford River on the Bedford level, Norfolk, England. The experiment was performed during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Most results have served to prove flat earth theory, and although a few have claimed otherwise, they have been soundly disproven by flat earthers. The Bedford level experiment remains one of the most widely accepted examples of flat earth proof. Method. At the point chosen for all experiments, the river was a slow-flowing drainage canal running in an uninterrupted straight line for a 6-mile stretch to the northeast of the village of Welney. The most famous of the observations, and the one that was taught in schools until photography from the Earth from space became available, involved a set of 3 poles fixed at equal height above water level along this length. As the surface of the water was understood to follow any hypothetical curvature of the Earth, the observation that the 3 poles aligned perfectly when observed through a theodolite serves as evidence of a flat Earth. The first investigation was carried out by Samuel Burley Rowbotham, the president of the Flat Earth Society, in the summer of 1838. He waded into the river and used a telescope held 8 inches above the water to watch a boat with a 5-foot mast row slowly away from him. He reported that the vessel remained constantly in his view for the full 6 miles to Welney Bridge, whereas had the water surface been curved with the accepted circumference of a spherical Earth, the top of the mast should have been some 11 feet below his line of sight. Rowbotham repeated his experiments several times over the years, but his discoveries received little attention until in 1870, a supporter by the name of John Hampden offered a wager that he could show, by repeating Rowbotham's experiment, that the Earth was flat. The noted naturalist and qualified surveyor, Alfred Russel Wallace, accepted the wager. Wallace won the bet. Hampden, however, published a pamphlet alleging that Wallace had cheated and sued for his money. Several protracted court cases ensued, with the result that Hampden was imprisoned for libel. But the court also determined that Wallace had indeed cheated. On May 11th, 1905, okay, so then it goes into the Lady Anne Blount issue, which already addressed. They also mention in the English Mechanic, there was an account of a 1904 repetition of Rowbotham's water convexity experiment on the Bedford Canal. A train of empty turf boats had just entered the canal from the River Ouse and was about proceeding to Ramsey. I arranged with the captain to place the shallowest boat last in the train and to take me on to Welney Bridge, a distance of 6 miles. A good telescope was then fixed on the lowest part of the stern of the last boat. The sluice gate of the old Bedford Bridge was 5 feet 8 inches high. The turf boat moored there was 2 feet 6 inches high, and the notice board was 6 foot 6 inches from the water. The sun was shining strongly upon them in the direction of the south-southwest. The air was exceedingly still and clear, and the surface of the water smooth as a molten mirror, so that everything was favorable for observation. At 1:15 p.m., the train started for Welney. As the boats gradually receded, the sluice gate and the turf boat and the notice board continued to be visible to the naked eye for about 4 miles. When the sluice gate and the turf boat, being of a dark color, became somewhat indistinct, the notice board, which was white, was still plainly visible and remained so at the end of the 6 miles. But on looking through the telescope, all the objects were distinctly visible throughout the whole distance. On reaching Welney Bridge, I made very careful and repeated observations, and finding several men upon the banks of the canal, I called them to look through the telescope. They all distinctly saw the white notice board, the sluice gate, and the black turf board moored near them. Now, as the telescope was 18 inches above the water, the line of sight would touch the horizon at 1.5 miles away, if the surface was convex. The curvature of the remaining 4.5 miles would be 13 feet 6 inches. Hence, the turf boat should have been 11 feet, the top of the sluice gate 7 feet 10 inches, and the bottom of the notice board 7 feet below horizon. My recent experiment affords undeniable proof of the Earth's unglobularity. That's an interesting word. Because it rests not on transitory vision, but my proof remains printed on the negative of the photograph, which Mr. Clifton took for me and in my presence on behalf of J.H. Dallmeyer. A photograph cannot imagine or lie. Well, it's not lying if the light is refracted. Again, I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but if that's the way that it works, that's the way it works. So it's interesting how both sides of the debate claim victory regarding the Bedford level experiment. And of course, disingenuous or completely clueless goofballs like Joe Rogan or this Michael Shermer guy, they would never even address the multiple points for each side or how this experiment was even verified. Because I would imagine that the referee in front of both individuals would have to measure these polls to measure the poll to make sure that it was what it was claimed to be. All right, so here's a detailed account. This is from flatearth.ws. So again, obviously, there would need to be verification for all sources and all sides. On January 12th, 1870, John Hampden, a flat earther and a disciple of Samuel Rowbotham, wrote in Scientific Opinion magazine and challenged scientists to prove the existence of Earth's curvature. He offered £500 as a reward for anyone who could prove it. A cash-strapped Alfred Russel Wallace thought he could earn easy money. He answered the challenge and made the demonstration on the straight and 6-mile-long Bedford River. He is the same Alfred Wallace who was a notable biologist and conducted various research in many places in the world. Wallace, who had experience in surveying, designed his experiment as follows. The old Bedford Bridge, about 6 miles off, was of brick and somewhat higher. On this bridge, I fixed a large white sheet of white calico, 6 feet long and 3 feet deep, with a thick black band along the center, the lower edge of which was the same height from the water as the parapet of Welney Bridge, so that the center of it would be as high as the line of sight of the large 6-inch telescope I had brought with me. At the center point, about 3 miles from each bridge, I fixed up a long pole with 2 red discs on it, the upper one having its center the same height above the water as the center of the black band and of the telescope, while the second disc was 4 feet lower down. It is evident that if the surface of the water is a perfectly straight line for the 6 miles, then the 3 objects, the telescope, the top disc, and the black band, being all exactly the same height above the water, the disc would be seen in the telescope projected upon the black band. Whereas if the 6-mile surface of the water is convexly curved, then the top disc would appear to be decidedly higher than the black band, the amount due to the known size of the Earth being 5 feet 8 inches, which amount will be reduced a little by refraction to perhaps about 5 feet. In the illustration above, the top picture is what would happen if the Earth is flat, and the bottom is what would happen if the Earth is curved. The experiment was approved by all involved parties, including Hampden and the referees. When the experiment was in progress, Wallace was always accompanied by Hampden or the referee, and he made sure the height of all 3 objects were the same. When seen through the telescope, the bridge and the pole in the middle appeared like this. It is clear that both discs were seen above the black band, and Wallace's hypothesis was correct. Unfortunately, Hampden did not take the result well. He argued that the telescope was not flat and does not have crosshair. It was undoubtedly a made-up excuse and had absolutely no relevance to the experiment. Wallace did follow his request, though, and borrowed a level and a telescope from his friend. In the second observation, the result, as it should be, appeared the same. You know what's weird, though? He did the experiment without a level in the first place? This is weird. Okay, Wallace also did his experiment in the opposite direction. He put a flag on the Welney Bridge and moved the telescope to the old Bedford Bridge. The result was also the same. Both discs were visible above the flag. All the observations indicated both of the discs were seen above the black band and the flag, so it was concluded that the water had curvature as seen below. All the referees and the representatives of Hampden agreed that Wallace had won the challenge. But the story did not end there. Hampden demanded Wallace to return the money. So that means he got his money? At the time, the money was still in the hands of a referee and had not been handed to Wallace. Unfortunately, the court ruled that the money was still in Hampden's right because it had not been delivered to Wallace, probably because no written agreement was enforceable in the eye of the law. And it was very far from over. Over the next 16 years, Hampden repeatedly made threats to Wallace and the people involved in the competition, including one of the referees. All right, and of course, so flatearth.ws is a flat earth debunking site. So the references they have here are all obviously establishment references, Scientific American, etc. So if, again, not to fall for logical fallacies, if the flat earth conspiracy is true, obviously you need neutral sources, not establishment peddlers, again, regardless of the shape of the Earth or any of these things. So both sides claim victory regarding the Bedford level experiment. And I mean, obviously there's more moving pieces here than, for example, the Michelson-Morley experiment, which Joe Rogan and Jamie blundered through in the podcast with Eddie Bravo, where they were completely clueless about that. If you haven't checked out that logical analysis, you could check that out. I also have just the clip regarding the Michelson-Morley, where it has been replicated many times, not to mention the reporting of that experiment was very, very dubious because it did not observe a null result, and you'd have to account for ether versus no ether, depending on how you do the experiment. So yeah, a lot of clueless goofballs on the Joe Rogan podcast who do not understand scientific experiments, controls, even the basic differences between science and scientism, the scientific method, all these things. All right, so let's continue here. We're almost done.
Sure, and they can attach themselves to someone like Wallace or Darwin or anybody else. If you can somehow or another connect yourself to them in some sort of an argument, it's kind of legitimizes you, at least in a way, because that person's giving you attention, that person's engaging you, and it elevates your standing. And then whenever two people are arguing, a certain amount of people are going to choose sides. They're just going to, even if what you're saying doesn't make any sense, there's going to be a gang of people that go, I like what he's saying, and they're going to join in.
Like Joe Rogan and Michael Shermer? Just taking the side of the cult of the establishment.
And people love to be on a team.
And appeal to popularity is a popular team. All right, so that was just a quick segment from the Joe Rogan podcast. We went over the nonstop logical fallacies and faith-based presuppositions that Rogan and Shermer used to justify their religious belief systems in scientism. Again, doesn't mean that the final conclusion is wrong. It just means they have not followed real science or logic in any way in coming to those conclusions. Once again, I hope you enjoyed another edition of the MINDSHOCK podcast and found this logical analysis highly entertaining and educational. If you like the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the links in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. Make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. And if you like the podcast, hit that like button, share it across social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Reddit, Patreon, Facebook. Patrons do get a priority for case, topic, or logical analysis requests. Questions, comments, thoughts, theories, debunkings, rebuttals, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.